Hello. In this task, what we're going to look at is using PDO and PHP to insert and update data. What I'm using as a scenario is that we're going to get students and we've got modules and we're going to give a grade to a student on a particular module. So there are various ways we can do that. I mean, that's one of the things that I like about programming is creative, and there's always different ways of doing the same thing. So one way we could do it is we could list all the students, pick one. With that student, we could then find all of the modules that student's on and give a grade to a given module. Or we might reverse that approach and instead we could not list the students, but we could list the modules and then pick one. And that's probably the most realistic in some ways, because often when you're grading, you grade a particular module rather than grade a student across all of their modules. But we could list the modules, then pick one, then list all of the students on the module. Now, in actual fact, I'm not going to do either of those. The way I'm going to approach it is to list the students and the modules in a select box, and then you give a grade you pick a student, you pick a module, you give a grade, and you click go. Now, to some extent, that's probably the least realistic way of actually doing it, but nonetheless, it's an easy way to explain various things. It's an easy way to explain how to create a dynamic form with list boxes, and you can extend that and do it in the form of a table if you prefer, or any other control. So, as always, I have a plan. I always tend to write out a plan in the form of text. I then convert that text into comments in my code, and then I write the code that fits the comments. I don't just jump in and start writing code. I always try and figure out a plan. I think that's by far the best way of doing it. It forces you to think at a higher level. First of all, it forces you to have an idea of what the outcome will be rather than get bogged down in code, and it gives you a way of in a way evaluating your code as you're writing it, to think, well, does it do that job that I'm asking it to do, rather than get bogged down in the details of the syntax. So at a high level, what I'm going to do is create a form, and I'm going to call it something or other form. I always do that, and the something or other is the task I wanted to do. Well, what I want it to do is change a student grade, so I'm calling it change student grade form, and then the form will have an action, and I'll make the action change the same action, change student grade, but without the word form in at the end of it. So that'll be the actual process that form will invoke. So the form will call change student grade. And what will the form itself do? Well, it'll display a list of students, it'll display a list of modules, and it'll give an input box for grade. But let's look at that in more detail. Well, first of all, in all testing code and in all assignment code that you might do for this particular module at the university, you would turn on error reporting, because you don't want to hide the errors, you want to see them and correct them. Obviously, in a production environment, you would make sure that was turned off, because you wouldn't want people to see the errors. So that's the first thing we'll do, is we'll turn on error reporting. Then we'll connect to our database. And if you've been following this course, you already have a nice little function to do that. So we'll just need to require the file and then call the function. We'll build a student query that will list all of the students, and we'll execute it. And we'll do the same for a module. We'll build a module query that will show all the modules and execute that. Then we'll start to display the form. We'll create a select list. That's the method I'm going to use to display students. And we'll loop through the result set that we got on this line here, and we'll create an option in this select list for each of the students. We'll end the loop, we'll end the select list, and then we'll kind of effectively do exactly the same thing again, but this time for modules. And then we'll create a simple input box where they can type in a grade. Now, we could have done exactly the same as we have done here. We could have selected a list of possible grades, and that again would be the way I'd probably do it, but just to show you an alternative way of creating an input box. And then obviously we're going to create a submit button, and we're going to end the form. So I'm not going to show you how to create a form. You can do that yourself, or create a file rather, you can do that yourself. The way I start is I always choose the file type as HTML, so as to get the kind of headings and footers, and then I don't save it as HTML, I save it as PHP. So that's kind of what I've done here. I've started a new blank HTML. This one is doctype HTML5. I've got the main thing. I've actually created a little kind of style section so that I can make my form look nice rather than put it inside a table or anything like that. It's a kind of cleaner layout. But again, I'm not going to cover that. You can come back and pause this screencast, or you can just make it up yourself. So what I've now done is I've taken that plan, look, and I've pasted it in the middle of some HTML tags, and I'm now going to fill in the blanks and write that code. Okay, so turn on error reporting. I just need to use init set the display errors directive, and I'll change that to true, so it will display errors. And I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to turn error reporting to a level of -1, which is the same as absolutely everything. It'll show all errors and warnings, etc., which is what I want to do. So now I'm going to connect to the database. So I'm going to require once, just as we've done before, the file in question, which in this case is the one that is called DB Connect, which is here to the side. And that DB Connect file, as I say, you've got this before, but what I'm doing is connecting using SQLite, a directory up into the folder called DB, and it's using that SQLite file. Obviously, if you're using MySQL, you'd change that and you'd put in the appropriate commands which are on the website. And I've added one extra thing, which is I've changing to exception mode rather than the normal error mode. So by doing that, I've allowed the possibility of using what's known as an exception, which we've not covered yet, but I'll perhaps cover that in the next screencast. Okay, so I've required that file, and that file contains a function, to remind you, that I call DB Connect, and what it does is connect and return that connection. So I need to call a function called DB Connect. So I'm going to do that. I'll store it into a variable called db equals db connect, and there's my function. Okay, so that gives me a database connection. So now I've got to come up with some SQL, build a student query and execute it. Okay, now I never kind of just make up a query without testing it first, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I've opened yes, I have. I've opened SQLite in a really excellent add-in for Firefox called SQLite Manager, and you can install that yourself. So this is the student data. I've got student code, forename, surname, various other fields that you don't necessarily need, but what we'll need is the student code and this stuff either concatenated together or as separate fields. So let's try and get some SQL to make that work. So select, what did I call it? Student code, comma, surname, comma, forename, from, what's the name of the table on the left hand side there, X student. Actually, I needn't be guessing what the names of these fields are. If I click on that, it will show me student code, forename, surname, and I've put it the other way around. Does that matter? It doesn't really. From that, so let's run that and see what happens. So there it is, but it's not in alphabetical order, so let's put it in alphabetical order, order by surname, and if there's two surnames the same, then order by forename. So, whoops, what have I just done? Order by instead of order. So that's the reason why it's a good idea to test your SQL before you put it into PHP. Otherwise you can spend ages thinking your problem is a PHP problem when your problem is actually an SQL problem. So that's my SQL, so I'll just copy that, come back to my editor, make up a query, so SQL student, and I call it students equals, in quotes, that. Okay, now I'm going to execute that query all at the same time. So that will give me back a statement object. So I'm going to call it statement students equals db query. And what's the SQL for this query? Well, it's the SQL students that I got a moment ago. So that gives me a statement object of all of the students from that result set. So I've now got to do exactly the same thing with modules. So SQL modules equals, in quotes, something or other, which I've now got to figure out. So this is module. So I want to select module code, module title. I won't bother with level. From X module order by module title. So if I run that, and there they are, look, and it's all ordered correctly. So let's take that SQL and copy it into there. Execute that, so we'll call that statement modules. Notice how I kind of use the same naming convention all the time. I'm less likely to make mistakes if I do that. Okay, so I've done that. So now I need to display my form. So I've got two options here, I guess. What I could do is stop PHP mode, like that, and then I'm in HTML and I could just do some HTML, or I could just echo the form. And I must admit that I tend to do the latter. Unless I've got a lot of HTML to display, I don't find it a problem to just use an echo statement. So that's what I'm going to do, because it just makes it a bit easier to debug sometimes. So echo in quotes. What? Well, let's display a nice heading saying enter a module result for a student. And now let's echo the actual start of the form. Echo. Right, we don't want form. The action for which is going to be something or other. What should we have it as? Well, I call this one change student grade form, so I'm going to call the action change student grade without the form part.php. And I'm just using single quotes there to save having to escape double quotes, and put the method to be get, so that I can actually see that on the command line. When it's all tested, I'll change it to post, but at the minute for debugging it's going to be much better left as method get. So I want to end that form. And now, rather than just do a separate echo, what I'm going to do, just to save a bit of time, is I'm just going to do this, where I've got one echo statement, and in the middle of it I'm just adding lots of HTML. So I'm going to do a field set, then I'm going to start a legend, so it'll look nice, saying student grade. I need a word as a label to my select box, so I'll put student, and now I've got the select box to start. Now we need to give it a name, because without a name it won't get passed to the script. It's only stuff with a name that gets passed. What we're actually going to pass is the student code. So I might as well call it student code. Right, that's the end of my form, so I'll bring that quote back and put the semicolon at the end of it. So what I'm echoing is all of that lot there. Okay, so that's me displaying the form. So actually that comment should have not been there, but it should have maybe been up here. Let's put it there, even though that bit's not displaying a form. Oops, mod. Your result for a student. Right. I've done that. I've created a select list of students. I'm going to loop through the student result set. So let's go after that and write the code. So while something or other, open brace, and end the loop. That's that comment. So I'm making my comments be in the right position. So if I'm going to loop through the result set, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to fetch out a student one at a time, and that student will equal me extracting from the statement, what was it called? Statement students, having fetched an object. Fetch object. Okay, I'm not passing a class or anything into that. So let's just review what that means. It means use the statement, in other words, the entire result set that was fetched back, and fetch as an object the first row of data. Store it into that student object. So what do we want to do with that? Well, we want to echo out a set of options for this select. So what we're going to do then is echo, and let me just put the option bit in first of all. Okay, now what do we want? Well, in here we want the descriptor, don't we? You know, the thing that the user sees, whatever that is. But when they choose that descriptor, what actually gets passed is whatever is the value in here. So that's usually some code or other. So in this particular example, the code in question will be, and I'll put it in braces for reasons I've explained in the previous screencast, because when it's a complex variable it helps define the start and end of that variable. So our complex variable is the student object and the field in question. So notice I listed the fields here, and I did that for a reason. I almost never write select star from. I like to list the fields because then here I know what those fields are. And the field in question is student code, that's the code. And then the descriptor, again, braces, will be that student object and the field from that, which was surname. And actually I want forename as well, so I'll put surname, then a comma, and then the other field that I've got is student forename. Okay, so in other words, as the descriptor, I'm going to use the surname, comma, and the forename. I mean, in actual fact, I could put in brackets and include what the student code was, because, you know, in real terms that might be a good idea, just because there might be lots of people called, you know, I don't know, John Smith or something like that. So in brackets, why don't I also take that bit of the code that I've got just to make absolutely certain what's being displayed. So it'll be a bit easier to see what this does in a minute. I suppose we could test it now. It's not finished, but let's test it. I'll save that, go to my browser, student grade form, let's click on that, and sure enough, look, I've got surname, comma, the forename, and in parens the student code. And we can always view page source to see what's being shown. I've got some errors here, look, and it's select name and then it's option and option. It's all on one line, on line 43. So if I'd got some errors on there, it would say error on line 43 and I wouldn't have a clue what it was, would I? So that leads me to another thing, which is here, after that select, I really want that to go onto a new line. So \n puts that source onto a new line. Let's just save that and quickly reload, and you'll see that that select, the option, will suddenly go onto a new line when I refresh the page. So that's gone to a new line, but it could do with tabbing in. I'm getting really anal, aren't I? But that's, I like to be I like it to be clear what's happening in the source code when I look at it. So \n on the end of that line, that's what the effect of that is. So, oops, I need to tab in 2 more times, look, but the source code now is looking a lot neater. So that, refresh, right, now it looks like nice HTML, doesn't it? And it's going to be much easier to debug, because frequently you have to debug not your PHP but the output of the PHP, so it's good to have it look the way you want it to look. So I've got to add an end select here somewhere, and obviously I've got to end my field set and end the form and do all sorts of things, and the form actually could have done with going on a new line, look, because that's all on the same line up there, so that's because I didn't do that one in the same echo statement. So let's add a new line at the end of that H1, so that goes onto it, a new line. And we're making sense here because I'm muttering as I'm thinking and typing quickly. I guess you can always press pause and rewind it if that's the case. So now I've got to end my select list, and I've got to do the same thing with modules. So echo quotes right, and if memory serves, that was tabbed in once, so we'll figure that out later. Now I'm going to do exactly the same as I've done here, echoing, looping through a list of students, except I've got to create a select list of modules and loop through that instead. So we'll do exactly the same thing. We'll echo a select, the name will be module code. Now I'm going to loop through the result set, so put the comment where it's meant to be, indent that, make some horizontal space so it's a bit easy to read, create an echo for each module. So echo following the same pattern, how many T's have I got? 3, and an option, the value will equal something around that, so in quotes, and then end option. So in there we want some data, and in there we want some data. I've suddenly realised that I've actually not put in that condition, so that will be a module, and it will be the statement for the module. Statement modules fetch object. Okay, so in here we fetch back a module object. Each module object is a row of the data, and we want to extract from that the thing, the field up there that I call module code. So module code. And in here, we want from the module object the field that was called module title. Okay. And now we need to end the select list. So echo create an input box, so, and create a submit button. Actually, let's do that all in one shot like we did before, because that worked out quite well. So I'm going to end the select box. We're then going to create an input box for the grade, so let's create a label. We'll call it, we'll say grade. We'll create an input of type equals text, the name of which will be equals grade placeholder to say that they should enter A, B, C, D, E, or F, and it's a non-container tag, so it ends like that. Okay, what else do I want? Well, now I want another input of type equals submit, the value of which will be save grade, and that's a non-container tag, so I'll end that like that too. Now, is that all I need to do? No, I started a field set, so I'm going to end that. Oops, just chose some completion that wasn't quite right. So field set. End the form. Okay. Slash n right at the end. So I've done all of that bit there. So let's save it and see how I get on. I always end up thinking of Clint Eastwood in this moment. Clint Eastwood did that film as Do You Feel Lucky, Punk? That's it. And, okay, so I'm going to tab some of these in more or less, but the select box looks as though it's finished okay. That select box module code looks as though it's finished okay. I've got a label with grade with input. So in terms of the source code, it looks all right. Let's look what the form looks like. Let's reload this form, and that sort of looks okay. Oh look, I didn't put a label in front of what that is. So let's go back, and this is the module. It's got a select. Yeah, I need a label in there. So label, and what they're choosing there is a module. So let's save that one. Yeah. So this is what my CSS did, by the way. It made this field set only a certain width. It made that italic. It made these float to the left, and it made these. So in other words, my HTML is all really nice and clean. You know, it's just select boxes and labels and legends and field sets, but it lays itself out in a way that often you might use a table to do, which is not really what you want at all, because it's not tabular data. So let's try that out. If I enter A there, it's obviously not going to work because it's going to call an action called change student grade, and in your case, if you're trying this with me, that won't exist. In my case, it does exist, but it doesn't contain any code. So if I click save grade, actually I say it didn't contain any code, and obviously it does because I haven't yet deleted it, but you can see what's been passed up above, which is what the important thing is. It passed the student code equals something or other, because that was the value in that select box. It passed module code equals something or other, the module code, and then it passed grade. So that's what we'll do in the next screencast, is we'll extract student code, module code, and grade from the request stream, and make sure it behaves nicely. Okay, so we'll do that in part 2.